Title: The Sandman, Chapter 1, Night Terrors. Jamie is a quiet, curious child who has always struggled with vivid dreams and a sense of unease at night. After overhearing his parents talk about a mysterious figure known as the Sandman, he becomes increasingly anxious and alert during the night, hoping to avoid the creature they described. One night, his curiosity leads him to investigate a noise coming from his parents' room, where he encounters a shadowy, menacing figure hovering over his father's bed. Jamie barely escapes the creature's notice, but he's left deeply traumatized, unable to convince himself that it was just a nightmare. Scene 1. A child's fear of the dark setting the stage. The chapter opens with a description of Jamie lying awake in bed, the room cloaked in darkness. The silence is thick and eerie, broken only by the faint ticking of a clock in the hall. Shadows dance across his walls, cast by the moonlight filtering through his curtains. Jamie's young mind fills the darkness with hidden monsters, but there's one presence he fears most: the Sandman, a figure he overheard his parents mention in a hushed conversation, building suspense and atmosphere. Jamie clutches his blanket tightly, his heart racing as he recalls what his mother said to his father. If he doesn't go to sleep, the Sandman will come. The words echo in his mind, adding weight to the dark silence of his room. He shuts his eyes tightly, pretending to sleep, hoping the Sandman won't visit if he believes hard enough. A mysterious whisper. Just as he begins to drift off, Jamie hears a faint whisper, something unintelligible yet chilling. His eyes snap open, but he sees nothing. He convinces himself it's his imagination, but an uneasy feeling settles in his chest, a feeling that he's being watched. He buries himself under the covers, hoping the darkness will hide him. Scene 2. The Sandman's Legend. Overhearing the legend. The next day, Jamie overhears his parents talking in the kitchen. His mother sounds worried, mentioning that Jamie has been staying up too late, and his father replies that the Sandman might scare him enough to make him sleep. They laugh nervously, brushing it off as an old wives' tale. But Jamie's curiosity is piqued. He wonders who or what the Sandman is and why his parents would use it as a threat. Curiosity and fear. Jamie's mind races and he starts imagining what the Sandman might look like. His childlike imagination conjures an image of a shadowy figure with hollow eyes and a wicked smile. Someone who lurks in the dark corners of bedrooms, waiting for the right moment to strike. The thought fills him with dread, yet he can't stop himself from thinking about it. Asking his parents. Later, he asks his mother about the Sandman. She grows quiet, her expression serious as she tells him it's just a story meant to make children go to sleep. But there's something in her tone, a hint of fear or reluctance, that makes Jamie feel uneasy. He senses she's hiding something, making him even more fearful and intrigued. Scene 3. The First Night of Terror. A sinister presence. That night, Jamie struggles to fall asleep. He feels vulnerable in the darkness, the shadows seemingly more sinister than usual. He imagines the Sandman creeping closer, watching him from the corners of his room. Suddenly, he hears a faint creak from the hallway, followed by soft footsteps approaching his door. Jamie's heart pounds as he pulls the covers over his head, hoping the creature will go away. Heightening suspense. The footsteps stop outside his door, and for a moment, there's only silence. Then, he hears a raspy breath, slow and menacing, as though something is sniffing the air, searching for him. Jamie's hands tremble, and he fights the urge to scream, fearing that any sound will bring the Sandman closer. A shadow in the doorway. Gathering enough courage to peek, Jamie pulls the blanket down just slightly, enough to see the doorway. A tall, dark figure stands there, its form barely visible in the dim light. Its head is slightly tilted, as if it's listening or watching him, and although he can't see its face, he feels its hollow gaze penetrating the darkness. Scene 4. The creature's escape investigating his parents' room. The next night, Jamie is determined to prove to himself that the Sandman isn't real. He stays up late, listening to his parents' voices fade as they go to sleep. An hour later, he hears a strange noise coming from their room, a shuffling sound, followed by faint whispers. His heart skips a beat, and he tiptoes down the hall, stopping outside their door. He presses his ear against it, hearing his father's soft breathing and an unfamiliar, raspy whisper. The suspense of discovery. Jamie slowly opens the door a crack, peeking inside. The room is dark, but moonlight spills in, illuminating a tall, shadowy figure standing over his father's bed. The figure leans forward, as though whispering something into his father's ear. Its face obscured, but its long, bony fingers reaching out, barely escaping. Jamie stifles a gasp, his hand flying to his mouth. The creature's head snaps up, turning slowly toward the door. Jamie feels the creature's gaze on him, a cold, invasive stare that chills him to his core. Panicked, he pulls the door shut quietly and sprints back to his room, diving under the covers and holding his breath. He waits, listening, but hears nothing. He convinces himself it was a nightmare, but he can't shake the feeling that the creature saw him. Viards. Scene 5. Desperate for answers. Trying to make sense. The next day, Jamie tries to understand what he saw. He knows it wasn't a dream. He felt the presence of the creature, the Sandman. He thinks about telling his parents, but he knows they won't believe him. He decides to keep it to himself, hoping he can figure it out on his own. Research and fear. Jamie sneaks into his father's office, searching for anything that might explain the Sandman. He finds an old book of folklore with a mention of the Sandman, a creature known to visit children who don't sleep, sometimes stealing their eyes if they look at him directly. The description terrifies Jamie, confirming his worst fears. He starts to wonder if he's marked, if the creature will keep coming back for him. A new resolve. Determined to stay safe, Jamie starts preparing himself each night, trying different ways to protect himself from the Sandman. He leaves the lights on, puts blankets over the windows, and even tries sleeping under the bed. But no matter what he does, he still feels the creature's presence, as if it's waiting patiently for the right moment. Scene 6. A terrifying encounter. The Sandman returns. One night, Jamie wakes up to a cold draft in his room. The window is open, though he remembers closing it. He hears the faint creak of footsteps approaching his bed, and his heart races as he senses the Sandman drawing nearer. This time, he knows it's not his imagination. The creature is real, and it's right beside him, building horror. Jamie feels a weight settle at the end of his bed, as if someone, or something, is sitting there. He dares not move, but curiosity gets the better of him. Slowly, he peeks over the edge of his blanket and sees a shadowy figure hunched at the foot of his bed, watching him with hollow, empty eyes, frozen in fear. The Sandman's face is hidden in darkness, but its bony fingers stretch toward Jamie, reaching for him. Paralyzed with terror, he closes his eyes, praying it will go away. He waits, feeling the creature's cold breath on his face, until suddenly the weight lifts, and the room is silent again. When he opens his eyes, the Sandman is gone, but Jamie knows it will return. Scene 7. A night of sleepless terror. The endless wait. Jamie lies awake until morning, unable to sleep, his mind racing with images of the Sandman's hollow eyes and skeletal fingers. He realizes that this is only the beginning, that the Sandman has marked him and will continue to visit. He feels trapped, terrified to sleep, yet unable to escape the creature's grasp. Fear and isolation. Jamie tries to tell himself it's all a nightmare, but deep down, he knows the Sandman is real. He begins to dread each night, wondering if this will be the night the creature finally claims him. The fear gnaws at him, leaving him exhausted, desperate, and utterly alone. Cliffhanger. As dawn approaches, Jamie finally feels the grip of sleep tugging at him. Just before his eyes close, he hears a faint whisper, unmistakable and chilling. "I'll be back, Jamie." His eyes snap open, his heart pounding, as he realizes that the Sandman will return, again and again, until he succumbs to sleep, and to the creature's grasp. Per chapter. Summary. In Chapter 1, Jamie's fear of the dark evolves into terror as he learns of the Sandman and experiences his first encounters with the creature. Each night, the presence of the Sandman grows stronger, filling Jamie's mind with dread. This chapter establishes the Sandman's relentless nature, leaving Jamie and the readers with a chilling promise of further horror to come. Chapter 2. The Haunting begins. In Chapter 2, Jamie's struggle with sleep and fear worsens as the Sandman's presence grows more persistent. Each night, the creature's visits become more terrifying, and Jamie finds himself unable to convince anyone of the danger he's facing. Desperate, he tries to create defenses against the Sandman, but the creature finds ways around them, always leaving a chilling reminder of its power. As Jamie's isolation deepens, he begins to realize that the Sandman won't stop until he claims what he's come for. Scene 1. Sleepless and paranoid. A child's terror. The chapter opens with Jamie lying in bed, wide awake, the silence of the night pressing down on him. The darkness feels heavy, almost suffocating, as he waits for any sign of the Sandman's approach. He remembers the creature's whispered promise. "I'll be back, Jamie." The words haunt him, filling him with dread and making it impossible to sleep, building suspense and isolation. Jamie's body is exhausted, but his mind is hyper-alert, clinging to every creak and shuffle in the house. He tries to rationalize the noises, telling himself it's just the house settling, but every sound seems to grow louder, amplified by his imagination. Watching shadows. His gaze is drawn to the shadows in the room, where he half expects to see the Sandman lurking. He imagines the creature creeping closer, its hollow eyes fixated on him, waiting to strike. Jamie's fear keeps him frozen in place, his only comfort the faint morning light that he knows will eventually come to banish the darkness. Scene 2. Trying to explain seeking help. The next day, exhausted and anxious, Jamie tries to explain his fear to his mother. He tells her about the shadowy figure in his room, about the whispers, and how he feels like he's constantly being watched. His mother listens, a look of concern on her face, but she dismisses it as just a bad dream. Growing isolation. Jamie feels frustrated and misunderstood. He wants to scream, to make her believe him, but he realizes that to her, he's just a scared child. She gently suggests he try sleeping with a nightlight, promising that it will help him feel safer. Feeling alone. That night, Jamie sets up a small nightlight, but the warm glow does nothing to ease his fears. He feels even more alone, knowing that no one will come to his aid if the Sandman appears. He lies awake, clutching his blanket, hoping he can stay silent if the creature returns. Scene 3. The Sandman's Game. The next encounter. In the middle of the night, Jamie wakes up to find his room colder than usual. The nightlight flickers and then goes out, plunging the room into darkness. He tries to move, but fear roots him to the bed. He senses a presence, feels the air grow thick and heavy, and hears soft footsteps approaching his bed, building the horror. The Sandman's shape materializes at the foot of the bed, an inky, twisted shadow that seems to absorb the light around it. Jamie barely dares to breathe, his body tense as he watches the creature lean closer. He can feel its gaze on him, see its hollow eyes, and smell a faint, musty scent that fills the air. The creature's voice. The Sandman whispers softly, his voice like dried leaves scraping across stone, promising Jamie that he will return every night until he claims what's his. Jamie fights the urge to cry out, knowing that his parents won't believe him, even if they come. Scene 4. Failed protections. Desperate measures. The next day, Jamie is desperate for a solution. He remembers reading that salt can protect against evil spirits, so he sneaks into the kitchen and grabs the salt shaker. That night, he sprinkles salt around his bed in a circle, hoping it will keep the Sandman away. Mounting desperation and paranoia, Jamie lies awake, waiting and listening, his heart pounding with anticipation. For hours nothing happens, and he starts to feel a flicker of hope. But just as he begins to relax, the familiar creak of footsteps echoes in the hall. The Sandman's mockery. To his horror, Jamie sees the Sandman step over the salt circle as though it's nothing. The creature pauses at the edge of his bed, tilting its head in a mocking gesture, as if to say that no barrier can keep it out. Jamie feels a wave of despair as he realizes that nothing he does can stop the Sandman. Scene 5. The toll on daily life. The cost of fear. With each sleepless night, Jamie's fear takes a toll on him. He begins to feel weak, constantly on edge, and finds it hard to concentrate in school. His teachers notice his drooping eyes, his inattentiveness, and his pale complexion, but he brushes off their questions, too afraid to tell them the truth. Isolation and anxiety. Jamie's friends begin to distance themselves, sensing something strange about him. They tease him for his tired appearance and odd behavior, calling him Zombie Jamie. He feels more isolated than ever, realizing that he is facing the Sandman alone. An attempt to stay awake. One night, Jamie decides to try staying awake all night, hoping that if he never falls asleep, the Sandman won't come. He reads books, plays games, and does everything he can to keep his eyes open. But as dawn approaches, his exhaustion overwhelms him, and he drifts off to sleep. His last thought a terrified hope that the Sandman won't notice. Scene 6. The Sandman's Revenge. A dark awakening. Jamie wakes with a start, feeling an icy breath against his face. The Sandman looms over him, closer than ever before. Its eyes are hollow pits, and its smile stretches impossibly wide, filled with shadows. The creature whispers that it can smell his fear and warns him never to attempt to stay awake again. Building terror. Jamie is frozen with terror, his eyes locked on the creature's face as it leans in, mere inches from him. The Sandman's hand stretches toward his eyes, its fingers long and bony, and Jamie feels a deep, instinctual fear that if he makes a sound, the creature will strike. A narrow escape. Just before the Sandman touches him, Jamie hears his mother stirring in the hallway. The Sandman's head snaps up, and with a flicker, it vanishes, leaving the room cold and empty. Jamie lies awake until morning, too frightened to move, realizing that he narrowly escaped. Scene 7. A strange pattern. Discovering the pattern. The next day, Jamie begins to notice a pattern to the Sandman's visits. It seems to grow stronger each time he tries to resist sleep or take measures to protect himself. He starts keeping track of the visits in a notebook, hoping he can find a way to predict or prevent them. Growing sense of helplessness. As Jamie studies the pattern, he realizes that the Sandman only appears when he's most exhausted or afraid, as if it's feeding off his fear and desperation. He wonders if the creature enjoys his terror, growing stronger with each visit. An ominous realization. Jamie begins to suspect that the Sandman is not simply visiting him. It's attached to him, feeding off his life. He writes in his notebook, "It doesn't want to just scare me. It wants something from me." The thought fills him with dread, as he realizes that escaping may be impossible. Scene 8. A failed plea for help turning to his father. Desperate, Jamie decides to tell his father about the Sandman, hoping he will believe him. He tries to explain the nightly visits, the creature's voice, and its menacing presence, but his father dismisses it as just a nightmare. Jamie pleads, but his father tells him it's time to grow up and face his fears, escalating isolation and despair. Jamie feels defeated, realizing that no one will believe him. His parents think he's just afraid of the dark, and his friends think he's strange. He's left to face the creature on his own, knowing that each night brings him closer to the Sandman's goal. The final night of terror. That night, Jamie lies awake, clutching his blanket and waiting. He's too exhausted to keep his eyes open, but every time he drifts off, he hears the faint whisper of the Sandman's voice, calling his name. Each time, he jolts awake, his fear growing with every whisper. Scene 9. A terrifying revelation. The Sandman's true intentions. As dawn nears, Jamie hears the Sandman's voice more clearly than ever before. This time, it's not whispering to scare him. It's speaking directly to him. The creature tells him that it's not just a figure of his imagination, nor is it bound to any story or myth. It exists to prey on children who fear sleep, feeding on their fear until they're too weak to resist. The horror of realization. Jamie feels a cold, sinking dread as he realizes the Sandman won't stop until it takes what it came for. His life force, his eyes, his very soul. He understands now that the creature has no limits, that it can and will reach him no matter what he does. A final message. The Sandman's voice lingers in his mind, echoing like a promise. Sleep, Jamie. Sleep, and I'll be waiting. Jamie's last thought before dawn is filled with terror, understanding that he is trapped in a nightmare with no end, as the Sandman continues its slow, relentless pursuit. The chapter. Summary. In Chapter 2, Jamie's attempts to fight off the Sandman only strengthen the creature's hold on him. His fear grows as each night brings a more terrifying encounter, leaving him isolated and exhausted. The Sandman's intentions become clearer, and Jamie realizes he's facing a creature that feeds on his terror, something far more sinister than a simple nightmare. This chapter intensifies the horror and suspense, leaving Jamie with the haunting realization that the Sandman will return, no matter what he does. Chapter 3. A fragile peace. In Chapter 3, Jamie is reaching the limits of his endurance, both physically and mentally. The Sandman's power over him intensifies, and he starts experiencing vivid hallucinations during the day. He becomes increasingly paranoid, feeling that he is haunted even in the safety of daylight. Desperate for answers, Jamie discovers clues that suggest the Sandman may have haunted his family long before he was born. This chapter combines elements of psychological horror and suspense, leading to a cliffhanger ending that suggests the Sandman's control over Jamie is growing. Scene 1. Losing sleep, losing sanity. A disturbing morning. Jamie wakes up feeling even more exhausted than before, his eyes heavy and his body drained. He remembers fragments of a nightmare, glimpses of the Sandman's hollow eyes and bony fingers reaching for him. Each day feels heavier, and he's haunted by a sense of unease that never leaves him, building paranoia and fatigue. Jamie tries to go about his morning, but his exhaustion affects everything he does. His hands tremble, his vision blurs, and he struggles to focus. He feels a presence watching him, even in broad daylight, as if the Sandman's influence has extended beyond the night. Fading boundaries. At school, Jamie experiences strange flashes. A shadow flickers in the corner of his vision, or he hears a faint whisper that sounds like his name. His friends notice his distracted behavior, and teachers grow concerned as he struggles to keep his eyes open. Jamie feels trapped, unable to explain his fear without sounding insane. Ramsum. Scene 2. Hallucinations in the daylight. A haunting vision. Walking home from school, Jamie sees a figure standing beneath a tree in the distance. The figure is tall, with a twisted form that he recognizes instantly as the Sandman. Jamie blinks, and the figure is gone, but the image lingers in his mind, as if the creature has marked him, following him even in the daylight. Escalating psychological horror. Jamie's fear begins to consume him, and he starts seeing shadows everywhere. Passing windows and mirrors, he catches glimpses of his reflection distorted into a wide, unsettling grin, one that resembles the Sandman's smile. His grip on reality loosens, and he wonders if he's truly awake, or if he's trapped in a nightmare, a voice in his mind. As Jamie walks through his neighborhood, he hears the faintest whisper in the wind, repeating his name over and over. It's the Sandman's voice, a sound that's somehow inside his head. Jamie clutches his head, trying to block out the whispers, but they grow louder, filling his mind with dread. He realizes the Sandman has found a way to haunt him, no matter where he is. Scene 3. The burden of silence. The growing isolation. Jamie's friends and family become increasingly worried about him, noticing the dark circles under his eyes and his nervous, jumpy demeanor. When he tries to explain his fear, they dismiss it as sleep-deprived delusion, and some friends begin distancing themselves, thinking Jamie's behavior is too strange, desperate to be believed. Jamie's isolation deepens, and he begins to feel like he's the only one who can see the Sandman. He tries telling his father again, but his father grows frustrated, insisting that Jamie's overactive imagination is the real issue. Jamie feels a painful sense of betrayal, realizing he has no one to turn to, a resolve to survive. That night, Jamie sits alone in his room, feeling the weight of his fear and loneliness. He decides that if no one will believe him, he will have to face the Sandman on his own. He places a mirror in his room, hoping to catch the Sandman in the reflection, as a way to prove he's real. As night falls, he prepares himself, waiting for the inevitable encounter. Scene 4. The Sandman's approach. A terrifying encounter. In the dead of night, Jamie is jolted awake by a chilling cold in his room. The mirror he set up begins to fog over, as if someone is breathing on it. Jamie's heart pounds as he sees the faint outline of a handprint appear on the glass, followed by a set of hollow, inhuman eyes staring back at him. Building terror. Jamie feels paralyzed, watching as the Sandman's face begins to emerge in the mirror, grinning at him with a malevolent hunger. The creature raises a finger to its lips, as if to shush him, then slowly vanishes from the glass. Jamie lies awake, trembling, knowing that the Sandman is toying with him, getting closer with every encounter. A haunting message. The next morning, Jamie notices a faint line scratched into the mirror, a word that reads, "Soon." The realization fills him with horror, and he understands that the Sandman is not just a presence, but a threat, a creature that is coming for him sooner than he expected. Scene 5. Discovering the family secret, seeking clues. Driven by a need to understand, Jamie begins searching his house for any clues that might explain the Sandman. In the attic, he finds an old family album containing photographs of relatives he's never met. One photograph stands out, a young girl with wide, frightened eyes, who resembles Jamie. Uncovering a dark past. He asks his grandmother about the girl, and she hesitantly explains that it's his aunt, who mysteriously disappeared as a child. Jamie presses for details, and she finally admits that the family once believed a sleep demon had come for her after she had repeated nightmares of a shadowy figure in her room. A chilling connection. Jamie realizes that his family has been haunted by the Sandman for generations. His aunt's disappearance was never solved, and his grandmother's fearful tone convinces him that she believes the Sandman took her. Jamie feels a mix of dread and responsibility, knowing he may be the next in line. Scene 6. A desperate search for protection. Turning to folklore, Jamie's newfound knowledge only deepens his fear. He turns to the internet, searching for anything related to the Sandman and protection from spirits or night creatures. He finds mentions of a ritual involving salt, candles, and mirrors, said to ward off sleep demons. Desperate, he decides to try it, even though he's unsure if it will work. The ritual preparation. Jamie spends the evening setting up a protective circle with salt and candles around his bed. He places the mirror on the floor, believing it might trap the Sandman's reflection. As he completes the ritual, he feels a small flicker of hope that he's finally taking control. A false sense of security. That night, Jamie lies in bed within the salt circle, feeling safer than he has in weeks. Hours pass without incident, and he dares to believe that the ritual worked. But just as he's about to fall asleep, the candles flicker and go out, plunging the room into darkness. Jamie's heart races as he hears the familiar sound of soft footsteps approaching. Scene 7. The Sandman breaks through the ultimate violation. In the pitch darkness, Jamie feels a presence in the room, an icy hand brushing against his shoulder. He tries to scream, but no sound escapes his lips. The Sandman whispers directly into his ear. "There's no hiding, Jamie. I see you." Jamie feels the creature's fingers graze his eyes, filling him with a sensation of suffocating dread, intensifying the horror. Jamie struggles to move, to break free from the creature's grip, but it's as if he's trapped in a waking nightmare. The Sandman's hand tightens, and Jamie hears the sound of scratching, like nails dragging across a blackboard. He realizes the creature is scratching marks into the mirror, each line a mark of its power over him, a mark of possession. When the Sandman finally retreats, Jamie collapses on his bed, gasping for air. He looks into the mirror and sees a new word scratched into the glass. Mine. The realization fills him with despair as he understands that the Sandman has claimed him, marking him as his own. Scene 8. Fading boundaries, blurred lines between dream and reality. Exhausted and terrified, Jamie finds it harder and harder to tell if he's awake or dreaming. Shadows seem to shift and move of their own accord, and he constantly feels as though he's being watched. His reflection in mirrors and windows sometimes appears to smirk at him, hinting that the Sandman's influence has crept into every part of his life. Psychological breakdown. Jamie's mind begins to unravel under the weight of his fear. He finds himself losing time, unable to remember how he got from one place to another. He starts to believe that he's trapped in a nightmare he can't escape, a reality where the Sandman controls everything. A new resolve. Desperate to free himself, Jamie decides to confront the Sandman directly. He believes that if he can face the creature without fear, he might weaken its hold. With newfound determination, he waits until nightfall, preparing himself for the final encounter. Scene 9. The Sandman's true face. The final confrontation. In the dead of night, Jamie lies in bed, wide awake, waiting for the Sandman. As the room grows colder, he hears the familiar creak of footsteps approaching. The Sandman appears at the foot of his bed, taller and more imposing than ever, its face a shifting mass of shadows and hollow eyes. Unveiling the horror, Jamie steels himself, forcing himself to meet the creature's gaze. He asks why it haunts him, why it won't leave him alone. The Sandman's mouth opens, revealing rows of shadowy teeth, and it whispers that it feeds on fear and that Jamie's terror has made it stronger than ever. A chilling revelation. The Sandman leans closer, its face mere inches from Jamie's. "You belong to me now," it says, its voice echoing through Jamie's mind. The creature's touch is cold and invasive, and Jamie feels a dark void opening up inside him, a realization that his worst fear has come true. The Sandman has become a part of him. Chapter summary. In Chapter 3, Jamie's life spirals further into terror as he realizes that the Sandman has not only haunted him, but marked him as its own. His search for answers reveals a dark family history, confirming that the creature has haunted his bloodline. With the Sandman's influence bleeding into his daily life, Jamie realizes he is caught in a waking nightmare from which there may be no escape. This chapter builds suspense and psychological horror, setting the stage for Jamie's desperate attempts to resist the creature in future chapters. In Chapter 4, Jamie's encounters with the Sandman intensify, plunging him deeper into fear and confusion. He learns unsettling details about the creature's connection to his family, and his isolation grows as his behavior becomes increasingly erratic. Jamie finds an old journal belonging to his missing aunt, revealing horrifying truths about the Sandman's power and her own struggles against it. This chapter blends psychological horror with growing suspense, leading to a revelation that foreshadows the Sandman's final intentions. Chapter 4. A glimpse of the past. In Chapter 4, Jamie begins to unravel a family mystery surrounding his aunt, who disappeared under suspicious circumstances when she was a child. Through her journal, he learns of her encounters with the Sandman, mirroring his own experiences and providing chilling insight into the creature's power. With each page, Jamie realizes the Sandman's connection to his family runs deeper than he imagined, suggesting he is trapped in a cycle that goes back generations. As Jamie's terror escalates, he's left with the knowledge that he is part of a dark legacy he may be unable to escape. Scene 1. Haunted memories. The struggle to keep awake. Jamie's nights have become a cycle of fear and insomnia, his every waking moment haunted by the memory of the Sandman's touch. Each time he tries to sleep, he is seized by visions of the creature lurking in the darkness, waiting to claim him. His eyes sting from exhaustion, and his mind begins to play tricks on him, blurring the boundaries between nightmares and reality. Building paranoia and desperation. Shadows seem to move on their own, whispering his name. He tries to convince himself it's just his imagination, a symptom of his sleepless nights, but he knows in his gut that the Sandman is still watching, waiting. Jamie feels himself teetering on the edge, fighting a losing battle to remain in control. The lure of his aunt's journal. In a moment of desperation, Jamie remembers the old family photographs he found, and the mysterious mention of his aunt's disappearance. Something compels him to search through his grandmother's belongings, hoping to find answers. He sneaks into her room, feeling a mixture of guilt and urgency, as if something dark is urging him on. Scene 2. An unsettling discovery. Finding the journal, Jamie's search leads him to a dusty, locked trunk in his grandmother's closet. After some effort, he pries it open, uncovering a worn leather journal with his aunt's name written on the inside cover. His hands tremble as he flips through the pages, finding entries written in a young girl's handwriting. Entries filled with fear and desperation, much like his own. Revelation of a shared fear. Jamie reads of his aunt's early encounters with the Sandman. She describes seeing a shadowy figure in her room, feeling its cold breath, and hearing whispers that seemed to echo in her mind. Jamie's blood runs cold as he realizes her experiences mirror his own. Each entry reveals a growing fear and a sense that the creature is somehow tied to their family. The Sandman's influence. His aunt's entries mention feelings of isolation and desperation, much like Jamie's own experiences. She writes of trying to tell her parents but being dismissed, left to face the Sandman alone. Jamie feels a pang of sorrow and fear, realizing his aunt faced the same horror he now endures. Scene 3. The rules of the Sandman. The Sandman's dark power. Jamie's aunt's journal reveals insights about the Sandman's abilities and intentions. She writes that the creature appears stronger when she tries to resist it, that it feeds off fear and exhaustion. She notes that the more she fights sleep, the more vivid her encounters with the Sandman become, as if he's taunting her, drawing her deeper into his grip. Establishing the Sandman's control. The entries reveal that the Sandman has rules, a strange and twisted logic that dictates his presence. She warns that the creature becomes more powerful the more he is acknowledged, and that he thrives in darkness, where fear can fester. Jamie realizes that by fearing the Sandman, he may have unwittingly given him more power, a sinister connection. One entry stands out, a mention of the Sandman referring to her as his. Jamie feels a wave of horror wash over him as he recalls the Sandman's chilling message to him, claiming him as mine. He realizes the creature's grip on his family may go back generations, a curse passed down to those vulnerable enough to be consumed by it. Scene 4. The descent into darkness. The final entries. As Jamie nears the end of the journal, he reads about his aunt's final days before her disappearance. She describes encounters with the Sandman that grew increasingly violent and invasive. She recounts a night where she felt the creature's touch on her skin, a cold, painful grip that left bruises. Her handwriting becomes frantic, her words fragmented as her fear overwhelms her. Sense of foreboding and desperation. Jamie's aunt writes of her certainty that the Sandman is coming for her, that he will not rest until he takes what he's come for. She mentions dreams of dark places, of following the Sandman through a forest and becoming lost, unable to find her way back. Her last entry is a chilling goodbye, as if she knows she won't survive the next encounter. An ominous note. The final page has one last chilling line scrawled in large letters. He's coming. Jamie stares at the words, his heart pounding, realizing that his aunt knew her fate. The fear she felt in her final moments radiates from the page, leaving Jamie with a sense of impending doom. Scene 5. Trapped in the cycle haunted by the past. After reading the journal, Jamie's fear intensifies, as he realizes he may be trapped in a family curse that goes beyond his control. The knowledge that his aunt vanished despite her efforts to escape fills him with a sense of hopelessness. He feels he's following the same path, destined to suffer the same fate. Building suspense and isolation. Jamie's behavior grows increasingly erratic, and he starts pushing people away, fearing that they won't understand or believe him. He becomes obsessed with finding a way to break the cycle, feeling that time is running out. His nights are filled with whispers and flickering shadows, reminders of the Sandman's looming presence. A moment of despair. One night, Jamie sits alone in his room, clutching his aunt's journal, feeling the weight of her words. He realizes he may have no way out, that the Sandman is waiting for him to make one wrong move. The room feels colder, the shadows darker, and he knows he's not alone. Scene 6. The Sandman's Lullaby. A new tactic. That night, the Sandman's presence feels different. Less aggressive, but somehow more terrifying. Jamie hears a faint humming, a dark and twisted lullaby that seems to seep into his mind, coaxing him towards sleep. The sound is both soothing and deeply unsettling, filling him with a dread he can't shake. Escalating psychological horror. Jamie tries to resist, but the lullaby grows louder, the rhythm hypnotic and irresistible. He feels his eyes growing heavy, his mind clouding as the Sandman's voice wraps around him, pulling him closer to unconsciousness. His fear intensifies as he realizes he's losing control, falling under the creature's spell. Caught in a nightmare, Jamie drifts into a half-sleep, where he finds himself in a surreal, darkened landscape. Shadows move around him, and he hears the Sandman's voice calling his name, drawing him deeper into the darkness. He tries to wake up, but he's paralyzed, trapped in the Sandman's domain, a place that feels like a twisted reflection of his own mind. Scene 7. A warning from beyond a familiar figure. In the nightmare, Jamie sees a figure in the distance, a young girl with wide, fearful eyes. He recognizes her as his aunt, or at least a ghostly version of her. She mouths a warning, but her voice is drowned out by the Sandman's eerie lullaby. Jamie strains to hear her, but the words are muffled, as if he's underwater. Building fear and desperation, the girl's face contorts in fear, her hand reaching out to him in a silent plea. Jamie realizes she's trying to warn him of something, a truth she learned too late. He feels a wave of terror, sensing that the Sandman is close, that he's watching this interaction and allowing it for his own dark amusement. A message in shadows. As the figure of his aunt fades, Jamie catches one last message: break the cycle, or you'll be next. The words linger in his mind as he jolts awake, drenched in sweat, the Sandman's lullaby echoing in his ears. He realizes that his only chance at survival is to find a way to sever the creature's hold over his family. Scene 8. The Final Revelation. Desperate for answers. Armed with his aunt's warning, Jamie sets out to find a way to break the cycle. He researches folklore, reading about ancient rituals that might sever spiritual connections. He learns of a ceremony that involves confronting the creature in a dream, demanding the release of its hold. But the process is dangerous, as it risks inviting the creature into his mind completely. Increasing stakes and tension. Jamie knows the ritual is risky, but he feels he has no choice. The Sandman's influence is suffocating, and he fears he won't last much longer without a final confrontation. As he prepares for the ritual, he feels the creature's presence more strongly, as if the Sandman knows what he's planning. A chilling decision. Standing alone in his room, Jamie gathers the materials needed for the ritual, his hands shaking as he lights a single candle. He feels a strange sense of calm, a resignation that he must face the creature on his own terms if he's to survive. The Sandman's voice fills his mind, whispering warnings and promises of a forever sleep. Jamie takes a deep breath, knowing this could be his last chance. Chapter. Summary. In Chapter 4, Jamie's journey into his family's past reveals a disturbing truth about the Sandman's connection to his bloodline. His aunt's journal provides insight into the creature's nature and suggests that the Sandman may be an ancient curse, one that feeds on fear and isolation. Jamie's attempts to escape are met with increasing resistance as the Sandman's influence grows stronger. Left with no other choice, Jamie decides to confront the Sandman in a dangerous ritual, setting the stage for a climactic encounter that will determine his fate. This chapter combines suspense and horror, leading to a thrilling cliffhanger. Chapter 5. The Insomniac's Descent. Chapter 5 follows Jamie's descent into the Sandman's nightmarish realm. He performs a ritual based on his aunt's journal and his own research, attempting to confront and free himself from the creature. As he enters a world of twisted shadows and haunting illusions, he faces nightmarish challenges that force him to confront his greatest fears. By the end of the chapter, Jamie discovers a horrifying truth. The Sandman's influence may be far deeper and darker than he ever imagined, with no easy way out. Scene 1. Preparing the ritual gathering materials. Jamie begins his night by preparing for the ritual. He gathers candles, salt, and a mirror as instructed by his research and his aunt's journal. His hands tremble as he places each item in a protective circle around his bed. The room is dark and silent, his only light a small candle flickering in the corner, building suspense and determination. Jamie's fear is palpable, but he feels a strange calm as he sets up his defenses, determined to face the Sandman and break the family curse. He recalls his aunt's journal, her own desperate attempts to escape, and steels himself, knowing this is his one chance. The final step. Jamie draws a line of salt around himself and positions the mirror in front of him, as the ritual demands. He repeats the words he found, a chant meant to call forth the creature and allow him to see into its world. His voice shakes, but he pushes forward, feeling a chilling energy building in the room. Scene 2. Crossing the threshold. Entering the Sandman's realm. As Jamie finishes the chant, the candlelight dims, and he feels a strange pull, as though the air has thickened around him. Shadows grow darker, the room distorting until he no longer recognizes his surroundings. He closes his eyes and takes a deep breath. When he opens them, he is no longer in his room but standing in a dark, fog-filled landscape. Immersive horror and mystery. Jamie looks around, his senses overwhelmed by the eerie quiet and the dense, cold fog swirling around him. He can hear faint whispers echoing from all directions, voices that sound both familiar and twisted. He knows he's in the Sandman's world, a place between nightmares and reality, a path of shadows. Before him lies a narrow path through the fog, bordered by faint, twisted trees that seem to lean toward him. Jamie feels a chill, but he knows there's no turning back now. With cautious steps, he follows the path, feeling as though he's walking deeper into his own subconscious, a realm where his darkest fears lurk. Scene 3. Encountering haunting visions. The first vision. As Jamie walks, he sees a faint figure emerge from the fog. It's a young girl, her face pale and hollow-eyed, but he recognizes her as his aunt from the family photos he found. She whispers warnings, her voice barely audible. "Don't trust what you see. He feeds on fear," she says before dissolving into shadows. Sense of isolation and horror. Jamie's heart pounds as he realizes he is truly alone, left to face the Sandman in this surreal and nightmarish world. He remembers his aunt's warnings in her journal, and he clutches the salt in his pocket, a small gesture that brings him some comfort in the overwhelming darkness. The Hall of Mirrors. Jamie turns a corner and finds himself in front of an archway lined with mirrors. Each mirror reflects a different version of him, some filled with terror, others with exhaustion and despair. He realizes he's looking at different versions of himself, each trapped by the Sandman's influence in a state of perpetual fear. Scene 4. The Sandman's Illusions. The Maze of Shadows. Jamie steps through the archway, entering a labyrinth where each turn reveals a new, horrifying illusion. He sees shadowy figures darting past him, hears faint cries and whispers, and feels the suffocating presence of the Sandman drawing nearer. His breaths come in quick, shallow gasps as he realizes the maze is designed to disorient him. Psychological tension and paranoia. Jamie starts to feel as though the walls are closing in, that the maze is somehow alive, shifting with his movements. He reaches a dead end and sees his reflection, pale and haunted, staring back at him from a cracked mirror. A grin slowly forms on the reflection's face. A grin he recognizes as the Sandman's. A desperate escape. Jamie panics, turning to find another way out, but the maze twists around him, trapping him further. The Sandman's laughter echoes through the hall, a low, mocking sound that chills Jamie to the bone. He feels the creature's presence getting closer, its eyes on him, feeding off his fear. Scene 5. Confronting fear. The final door. At the end of the maze, Jamie finds a heavy wooden door. His hand trembles as he reaches for the handle, sensing that whatever lies beyond it will force him to confront the Sandman directly. He steels himself and opens the door, stepping into a pitch-black room that feels suffocatingly small. Escalating tension and suspense. Jamie stands in the darkness, unable to see anything, feeling the Sandman's presence around him. He feels a cold hand brush against his shoulder, and he resists the urge to scream, knowing that his fear will only strengthen the creature. The Sandman's voice. A deep, rasping voice fills the room, coming from all directions. "You cannot escape me, Jamie. I am your fear. I am your darkness." Jamie shuts his eyes, refusing to let the creature control him. He repeats his aunt's advice in his mind. Don't feed him with fear. Scene 6. The Sandman's Bargain. A chilling offer. The Sandman reveals himself in the darkness, his hollow eyes and twisted grin hovering inches from Jamie's face. He speaks slowly, tauntingly, offering Jamie a deal. If Jamie submits and gives him his soul, the Sandman will leave his family alone. Jamie realizes the creature is offering him a choice between his own life and the freedom of his family. Testing Jamie's resolve. Jamie struggles with the decision, the Sandman's words weaving a web of fear and manipulation. The thought of freeing his family is tempting, but he knows that submitting to the Sandman means losing himself forever. He clutches the salt in his pocket, feeling a renewed strength, a refusal to submit. With a shaky breath, Jamie refuses the Sandman's offer, declaring that he will not submit. The creature's eyes narrow, and its grin widens as it lets out a low, menacing laugh. Jamie realizes he has angered the creature, that it will now try to break him completely. Scene 7. The true nature of the Sandman. The Sandman's revelation. The Sandman's form shifts, growing larger, its shadow filling the room. He reveals that he is more than a creature of nightmares. He is an ancient entity, a collector of souls, who feeds on fear, bound to those who acknowledge him. Jamie feels a crushing despair as he realizes the depth of the creature's power, building horror and despair. Jamie's fear grows as he listens, understanding that the Sandman has haunted countless generations, that he cannot be defeated easily. He realizes that by fearing the Sandman, he may have inadvertently invited the creature deeper into his life, making it nearly impossible to escape. A faint hope. Remembering his aunt's words, Jamie clings to the hope that he might weaken the Sandman by facing his fears. He forces himself to stand tall, refusing to show fear, meeting the creature's gaze head-on. The Sandman falters slightly, its form flickering, as though weakened by Jamie's defiance. We come this from Scene 8, the Battle of Wills. The Sandman's wrath. Furious, the Sandman lashes out, filling the room with a suffocating darkness. Shadows coil around Jamie, pulling him toward the ground as the creature's voice fills his mind, repeating his deepest fears and insecurities. Jamie feels his strength draining, the darkness overwhelming him. Climactic showdown. Jamie fights back, focusing on his memories of family, hope, and resilience. He speaks out, declaring that he is not afraid, that he won't let the Sandman control him. With each word, the shadows retreat slightly, as though weakened by his determination, breaking the connection. In a final act of defiance, Jamie throws the salt from his pocket into the creature's face, watching as it recoils in pain. The room brightens, the darkness lifting, and Jamie feels the Sandman's grip weaken. The creature lets out an enraged scream, its form dissolving into shadows that dissipate around him. Scene 9. A bitter victory. Returning to reality. Jamie opens his eyes and finds himself back in his bedroom, drenched in sweat and gasping for air. The mirror in front of him is cracked, his reflection fragmented, but he senses that the Sandman's hold over him has been broken, if only temporarily. Lingering doubts and relief. Though he has escaped for now, Jamie knows the Sandman may not be gone forever. He feels a strange emptiness, as though a part of the creature still lingers within him, a shadow that will never fully leave. Yet, he feels a sense of relief, having faced his fear and survived. A haunting reminder. As Jamie drifts into a fitful sleep, He hears a faint whisper, barely audible yet unmistakable. "I'll be back, Jamie." The chapter ends on a chilling note, leaving Jamie with the knowledge that his victory may be only temporary, and that the Sandman is far from finished. Chapter summary. In Chapter 5, Jamie confronts the Sandman in a desperate ritual, entering the creature's nightmarish realm in a bid to break free. Through a series of terrifying visions and illusions, he faces his fears and resists the Sandman's attempts to claim his soul. Though Jamie emerges victorious, the chapter ends with an unsettling reminder that the Sandman's hold on him may not be broken entirely, setting the stage for the next chapter. This chapter combines psychological horror and suspense, intensifying the stakes and leaving Jamie, and readers, with lingering doubts about the Sandman's power. Chapter 6. Shadows Without End. In Chapter 6, Jamie's hope of freedom crumbles as he finds himself trapped in an escalating nightmare. Every moment of the day feels haunted, and his grip on reality weakens as the Sandman's influence re-emerges stronger than before. Desperation drives Jamie to question his sanity, and he becomes convinced that the creature is attempting to control his mind and body. The Sandman's ultimate plan is revealed in a terrifying confrontation, leading Jamie to a realization that shakes him to his core. Scene 1. A fleeting peace. A hollow victory. Jamie awakens the next morning, exhausted but relieved, believing he has finally weakened the Sandman's grip. The room feels cold and empty, but he convinces himself it's only his fear trying to resurface. The broken mirror still hangs on his wall, cracked from the ritual, as a lingering reminder of the struggle he endured. Sense of fragile hope. Jamie spends the day clinging to this sense of peace. His family notices a shift in his behavior, noting that he seems more relaxed, but deep down, he knows something still feels wrong. There's a heaviness in his chest, a whisper of doubt that tells him the Sandman is far from gone. A familiar whisper. Just as he begins to feel some relief, he hears a faint, echoing whisper. "Jamie." The sound is chilling, like a breath against his ear. He freezes, dread washing over him as he realizes that despite the ritual, the Sandman may still be with him, lurking just out of sight. Scene 2. Visions in the daylight. Seeing shadows. Throughout the day, Jamie begins noticing shadows following him, lingering just out of reach. At first, he dismisses it as paranoia, but the shadows seem to grow darker, flickering in the corners of his vision, even in well-lit rooms. It's as if the Sandman has found a way to haunt him in broad daylight. Psychological horror and uncertainty. Jamie's sense of reality begins to unravel as he questions whether he's truly awake or trapped in a waking nightmare. Shadows seem to stretch and distort, forming fleeting images of the Sandman's twisted face. The sensation of being watched is constant, eroding Jamie's confidence in his own sanity. A hallucination, or worse? At one point, Jamie catches a reflection of himself in a glass window, his face twisting into a grotesque grin. His eyes stare back at him, hollow and dark, as if the Sandman's influence has seeped into his very image. Panicked, he looks away, but the vision lingers in his mind, making him doubt what's real. Scene 3. Slipping into darkness. The return of the nightmares. That night, Jamie's sleep is haunted by vivid nightmares. He finds himself wandering through a dark forest, branches clawing at him as he hears the Sandman's voice calling his name. Each syllable a low, rasping whisper. The landscape is surreal, a twisted version of his own memories mixed with shadowy illusions, heightening the sense of desperation. Jamie tries to wake up, but the nightmare feels too real, as if he's trapped in the Sandman's realm. Shadows wrap around his limbs, pulling him deeper into the darkness, and he realizes that escaping may be impossible. He hears voices, his own echoing in fear, telling him to surrender. A terrifying awakening. When Jamie finally wakes, he finds scratches on his arms, as if something had truly been pulling him down. The physical marks blur the line between dream and reality, leaving him unsure if he's safe even in his own bed. Bansum Chi Turok Scene 4. The Sandman's growing influence. Losing control. In the days that follow, Jamie starts experiencing lapses in memory. He finds himself in different parts of the house without remembering how he got there, and his reflection occasionally grins back at him with a look that's not his own. He suspects that the Sandman is trying to control his body, erasing pieces of him in the process. Sense of isolation and helplessness. Jamie's family grows more concerned as his behavior becomes erratic. His friends distance themselves, sensing something dark and unsettling about him. Jamie feels trapped, unable to explain what's happening to him without sounding insane, and he becomes terrified of his own mind. A warning from within. One night, Jamie looks in the mirror and sees his own face mouthing the words, "He's inside you." The shock sends a chill through him, as he realizes that the Sandman may have infiltrated his very consciousness, twisting his mind from the inside. Scene 5. The hallucination of the Sandman's world. A waking nightmare. Jamie experiences a horrifying vision where he's pulled into a version of his bedroom, cloaked in shadows. Everything is distorted, and a thick fog seeps through the floor, filling the room with an unnatural chill. He hears the Sandman's breathing, slow and heavy, as the creature appears before him. Intensifying suspense. Jamie tries to escape, but every door leads him back to the same room, trapping him in a loop. The Sandman steps closer, its hollow eyes fixed on him, and Jamie feels a pull, as though the creature is drawing him into its own reality. He realizes that the Sandman is blurring the line between worlds, merging dreams with reality. A terrifying bargain. The Sandman offers Jamie a deal. If he submits to the creature fully, the torment will end. Jamie hesitates, feeling a powerful urge to give in, but he knows that surrendering would mean losing himself completely. With a desperate burst of will, he resists, and the vision shatters, leaving him alone and gasping for breath. Scene 6. The revelation. A cryptic message. Later, Jamie finds a note left on his desk, written in his own handwriting. It reads, "The darkness is within." He stares at it, realizing that the Sandman is not just an external force. It's becoming part of him, taking over his thoughts and actions. The realization fills him with dread, as he begins to suspect he may never be able to rid himself of the creature. Psychological horror and despair. Jamie feels trapped within his own mind, fighting a losing battle as the Sandman continues to consume him. He tries to ignore the whispers, but they grow louder, filling his mind with doubts and fears. He wonders if he's already lost, if the Sandman has already taken control. A flicker of the Sandman in his eyes. Jamie looks in the mirror, and for a fleeting moment, he sees the Sandman's hollow eyes staring back at him. He stumbles back, horrified, as he realizes that the creature is now intertwined with his own reflection, haunting him from within. Forsama. Scene 7. Facing the final truth. A conversation with his dark self. One night, Jamie feels compelled to look in the mirror again, and this time, his reflection speaks back, with the Sandman's voice. "You cannot fight me, Jamie. I am part of you now." The creature reveals that it has been waiting, slowly merging with him, feeding off his fear and despair. The horror of losing self-control. Jamie's worst fear is realized as he understands that the Sandman's ultimate goal has always been to take over his mind, body, and soul, leaving nothing of Jamie behind. He feels his identity slipping away, piece by piece, as the creature's influence grows stronger. A desperate plea. Jamie tries to bargain, begging the Sandman to leave him, but the creature only laughs. It tells him that fear invited it in, and that Jamie's own terror has made it stronger. Jamie realizes that every attempt to fight the Sandman has only bound them closer, cementing the creature's control. Scene 8. Trapped in the Sandman's embrace. The final struggle. Jamie's mind slips further into darkness, and he finds himself in a shadowy, endless expanse where he can see only the Sandman's face. The creature's eyes bore into him, absorbing his strength, his memories, and his willpower. Jamie feels himself fading, his own thoughts merging with the Sandman's. The descent into oblivion. Jamie clings to fragments of his identity, memories of his family, and the love he once felt, trying to hold on to what's left of himself. But the Sandman's presence is overpowering, like a suffocating fog that leaves no room for anything but fear. A single act of defiance. In one last act of defiance, Jamie screams, a sound that seems to cut through the darkness. The Sandman pauses, its grip loosening for just a moment, and Jamie feels a flicker of hope. He realizes that his resistance, however small, is the only thing keeping him from being fully consumed. Scene 9. A hollow escape, returning to reality. Jamie awakens in his room, drenched in sweat, feeling hollow and empty. The Sandman's whispers linger in his mind, and he knows that although he escaped the final takeover, he is forever changed. He feels a lingering presence within him, as though the creature left a part of itself behind. Lingering doubts and resignation. Jamie stares into the mirror and sees himself, but he knows that the Sandman is still there, hiding in the shadows of his mind. He understands that he may never fully escape, that he is bound to the Sandman in a way he can't undo. A haunting conclusion. As Jamie prepares to face another night, he hears the familiar whisper in his ear. "You can't escape me, Jamie. I'm always here." The chapter ends with Jamie sitting in the dark, knowing that the Sandman's presence will be a part of him forever. A chapter summary. In Chapter 6, Jamie's attempt to break free from the Sandman's grip fails, leading him to a harrowing realization that the creature has become part of his very being. As his mind and body slip into the Sandman's control, he confronts the horrifying truth that the creature cannot be easily defeated. This chapter explores themes of identity, loss of control, and psychological horror, culminating in Jamie's acceptance of his dark fate, haunted by the knowledge that the Sandman will never truly leave him. Chapter 7. The Shadow's Grasp. In Chapter 7, Jamie's mental state continues to deteriorate as he experiences intense hallucinations and moments where he feels the Sandman completely taking over. His life becomes a waking nightmare as he loses his sense of self, no longer able to distinguish his own thoughts from the Sandman's. Desperate, he prepares for a final confrontation, entering a world of shadows and illusions where he faces the creature's full power. In the climax, Jamie learns that his entire existence may have been a twisted game in the Sandman's design. Prüfungspfand Scene 1. A slow descent into madness. The Sandman's whispering influence. Jamie wakes to find himself exhausted, his mind clouded and heavy. Whispers fill his head, voices repeating his name in a tone that seems both familiar and foreign. He can't shake the feeling that the Sandman is everywhere, watching him from the shadows, feeding on his weakening resolve, suspense, and horror. Each sound, each fleeting movement, feels as if it's orchestrated by the Sandman, driving Jamie into deeper paranoia. He questions every thought, unsure if it's his own or a product of the Sandman's influence. The once clear boundaries between his own mind and the Sandman's will are vanishing. Moments of lost time. Throughout the day, Jamie experiences strange lapses in time. He'll find himself in different rooms of his house, with no memory of how he got there. His family begins to notice his odd behavior, growing concerned, but Jamie feels he can't trust them with the truth. Scene 2. Losing control. A frightening possession. One night, Jamie catches a glimpse of himself in the mirror and is horrified to see his reflection smiling. A wide, sinister grin that doesn't belong to him. His face distorts, his eyes hollow, and for a split second, he feels the Sandman inside him, controlling him. Jamie screams, but the reflection's grin remains, a chilling reminder that the Sandman is taking control. Building psychological horror. Jamie's perception of his own identity begins to disintegrate as he feels the Sandman slipping into his thoughts and actions. He wonders if he's losing his mind, becoming a puppet for the creature's amusement. A warning from within. The Sandman's voice fills Jamie's head, whispering that resistance is futile. It reminds him of the countless souls it has claimed, each one feeding its endless hunger. The voice taunts him, suggesting that Jamie's very existence has been orchestrated for this purpose, that he was always meant to belong to the Sandman. Scene. 3. The Sandman's world leaks through hallucinations and shadows. As Jamie's paranoia grows, he begins seeing glimpses of the Sandman's dark world merging with his own. Shadowy figures flicker in his peripheral vision, and walls seem to shift and twist, as if trying to pull him in. Everyday objects appear distorted and warped, reflecting the Sandman's influence over his reality, intensifying the nightmare. Jamie's environment becomes increasingly unstable, blurring into something out of a nightmare. His family members' faces appear twisted and shadowed, and he finds it hard to tell if they're real or illusions. He starts questioning if he's still in the real world, or if he's already in the Sandman's domain. The Sandman's grinning reflection. Jamie avoids mirrors, but one day he glances at his reflection and sees the Sandman staring back at him with hollow eyes. The reflection doesn't move with him, but stands there, grinning, as if waiting for him to break. The sight fills him with a sense of impending doom as he realizes the creature is slowly replacing him. Scene 4. The desperate decision. Preparing for a final confrontation. Jamie knows he can't live like this any longer. He feels his sense of self slipping away. Desperate for a solution, he decides he must confront the Sandman directly, hoping to break the creature's influence once and for all. He gathers what little information he has left from his aunt's journal and his research, preparing a ritual meant to draw the Sandman into a final confrontation. Building tension. Jamie lights candles, draws protective symbols, and recites the incantations he has pieced together. His hands shake as he prepares, his fear and determination battling for control. He knows he may not survive this encounter, but he is willing to risk everything to free himself. Crossing the threshold, Jamie closes his eyes, focusing on drawing the Sandman into his mind. He feels a strange shift, a pull that leaves him dizzy and disoriented. When he opens his eyes, he is no longer in his room, but in a dark, fog-filled landscape, the Sandman's world. Scene 5. Entering the Sandman's domain, a twisted mirror of reality. Jamie finds himself in a nightmarish version of his home, where everything is dark and distorted. Shadows stretch and shift, and the walls seem to breathe. He hears faint whispers, echoing cries, and feels the weight of countless souls trapped within this realm, creating a sense of helplessness and fear. Jamie's fear intensifies as he realizes he is completely alone in this place. He feels a powerful, malevolent presence surrounding him, watching his every move. Shadows swirl around him, flickering images of faces filled with despair and terror, the faces of those who have fallen victim to the Sandman. The Sandman's arrival. Jamie feels the temperature drop as the Sandman materializes before him, his twisted grin and hollow eyes more terrifying than ever. The creature's voice echoes, telling Jamie that this confrontation is pointless, that he's already lost. Jamie gathers his courage, demanding answers and a way out, but the Sandman only laughs. Scene 6. The Sandman's true intentions. A dark revelation. The Sandman reveals that Jamie's family has been trapped in a cycle of fear for generations, with each generation feeding his power. The creature explains that Jamie's fear and desperation were precisely what he needed to make this moment possible. That Jamie was chosen from birth to become a vessel for the Sandman's endless hunger. Exploring themes of fate and helplessness, Jamie realizes he has been living in the Sandman's trap all along, that his attempts to resist have only made the creature stronger. The Sandman has been waiting, slowly wearing him down, feeding on his fear until Jamie is nearly hollow, ready to be claimed. The plan unveiled. The Sandman steps closer, explaining that he intends to absorb Jamie's soul completely, erasing his identity and taking his place. Jamie will be left as nothing more than a shadow within the Sandman's consciousness, an eternal prisoner in a world of darkness and fear. Scene 7. A battle of wills. Jamie's defiance. Desperate and terrified, Jamie tries to resist, focusing on his memories and the love he feels for his family. He realizes that his only chance is to fight with every part of himself, using the last fragments of his humanity to push the Sandman back. He speaks out, declaring that he won't give in, that he won't become just another shadow. Climactic showdown. The Sandman's form shifts and distorts, his grin faltering as Jamie's defiance weakens him. Jamie feels a surge of strength, realizing that his resistance has power. He fights back, forcing the Sandman to retreat slightly, his voice growing louder as he challenges the creature's control. The struggle for control. Shadows whirl around them, a chaotic storm of light and darkness as Jamie and the Sandman battle for control. Jamie feels himself slipping, his energy draining, but he clings to his sense of self, fighting for every piece of his identity. The Sandman's laughter echoes, taunting him, but Jamie pushes on, refusing to surrender. Scene 8. The choice. A terrible choice. As the battle rages on, the Sandman offers Jamie a final, twisted choice. The creature tells him that if he surrenders willingly, he will become part of the Sandman's legacy, sparing his family from future torment. But if he continues to resist, the Sandman will ensure that his family suffers even more. Building psychological horror and suspense. Jamie is torn, his heart aching as he considers the cost of his defiance. He feels the Sandman's influence growing stronger, pressing down on him, suffocating him with the weight of countless souls lost to the creature's hunger. The moment of decision. Jamie realizes that surrender means losing himself completely, becoming a part of the very creature that has tormented him. But he also knows that defiance may doom his family to the same fate. With tears in his eyes, he makes a choice that will either save him or condemn him forever. Scene 9. A hollow victory breaking free. With a final surge of strength, Jamie screams, rejecting the Sandman's offer and pushing back with every ounce of his willpower. The Sandman's form shatters, dissolving into shadows that swirl around Jamie before vanishing into the darkness. Jamie collapses, feeling a strange emptiness within him, as if a part of him has been stripped away. Lingering horror and ambiguity. Jamie awakens in his room, feeling a hollow victory. He senses the Sandman's presence lingering within him, like a shadow that can never be fully erased. He knows he has won, but at a great cost. A part of him will always belong to the Sandman, bound to the darkness he fought so hard to escape. The haunting echo. As Jamie looks into the mirror, he sees his reflection staring back, a faint grin tugging at his lips. The Sandman's whisper lingers in his mind. "You may have won this time, Jamie, but I'm always here." The chapter ends with Jamie standing in his room, haunted by the knowledge that the Sandman's presence will forever remain a part of him, hidden in the shadows. Chapter summary. In Chapter 7, Jamie confronts the Sandman in a final desperate battle, learning that he has been part of the creature's twisted plan all along. The Sandman's goal is revealed, to absorb Jamie's soul and take his place, erasing his existence. Jamie resists, ultimately breaking free, but his victory is bittersweet, as he realizes he can never fully escape the Sandman's influence. This chapter combines supernatural horror with psychological suspense, leading to a haunting and ambiguous conclusion that suggests the Sandman's presence will haunt Jamie forever. Chapter 8. The Unraveling. In Chapter 8, Jamie's sense of self deteriorates as the Sandman's influence resurfaces, bringing with it disturbing hallucinations and lapses in memory. Jamie begins to suspect he is losing himself entirely, with the Sandman claiming his identity piece by piece. Desperation drives him to seek a final solution, even if it means facing a horrifying truth, that there may be no escaping the Sandman, and he might have already surrendered more than he realizes. This chapter builds on themes of possession, despair, and the blurred lines between reality and nightmare, climaxing in a revelation that shatters Jamie's sense of hope. Scene 1. A fading victory. The illusion of freedom. Jamie wakes up feeling an eerie calm, a deceptive quiet that fills him with an unshakable dread. The room feels emptier, almost hollow, as if something essential has been taken from him. He tries to shake off the feeling, convincing himself that he's free of the Sandman, but there's a nagging sense of incompletion that lingers. Building suspense. Throughout the morning, Jamie clings to the idea that he has escaped, though small signs suggest otherwise. Shadows seem to move just out of reach. His reflection in mirrors appears a beat too late, and he feels a slight chill that never fully leaves him. The whisper in his mind. As he goes about his day, Jamie hears a faint whisper in the back of his mind, a familiar rasping voice. "I'm still here, Jamie," it says, barely audible but chillingly certain. Jamie's heart sinks as he realizes that his struggle with the Sandman might be far from over. Scene 2. The creeping influence, dark hallucinations. That evening, Jamie begins seeing glimpses of the Sandman's face in unexpected places. A flash in a darkened window, a silhouette against the wall, a shadow curling in the corner of his vision. Each sighting feels more real than the last, like the creature is slowly merging with Jamie's world, taking on a life of its own. Escalating psychological horror. Jamie's mind spirals as he wonders if he is hallucinating, or if the Sandman is truly creeping back into his life. He becomes hyper-aware of every shadow, every flicker of movement, feeling as if he's surrounded by an invisible threat that only he can sense. Losing control of his body. Jamie begins experiencing moments where he can't control his own movements, as if his body is moving on its own. He finds himself performing small actions, writing strange symbols, murmuring phrases in a language he doesn't recognize, without remembering how he started. Each episode leaves him more convinced that the Sandman is gradually taking over. Scene 3. The mirror's betrayal. A distorted reflection. One night, Jamie stands before a mirror and is horrified to see his reflection smiling back at him. A grin that's wide and sinister, with hollow dark eyes staring back. His reflection moves independently, its mouth forming silent words that Jamie can almost hear in his mind. Heightening the tension. Jamie reaches out to touch the mirror, but his reflection doesn't mimic the movement. It tilts its head, watching him with a gaze filled with hunger and malice. Jamie stumbles back, a sense of horror washing over him, as he realizes that the Sandman may have infiltrated his very soul. The reflection speaks. Suddenly, his reflection begins to speak, its voice a low, mocking whisper that fills his mind. "Why fight me, Jamie?" it asks. "You're already mine." Jamie feels a chill settle in his chest, his last threads of hope unraveling as he begins to accept that he may already be losing the battle. Scene 4. The shattering of reality. Strange lapses in time. Over the next few days, Jamie's sense of time begins to slip. He'll find himself in unfamiliar places, with no memory of how he got there. His belongings appear rearranged, and messages he doesn't remember writing begin to show up on his walls, each one a chilling taunt. "Give in. Join me." Intensifying desperation. Jamie tries to stay awake, fearing that sleep will give the Sandman more control. He fills his days with activity, but fatigue takes its toll. He starts losing track of days, no longer able to trust his own senses, feeling like he's living in a fragmented reality orchestrated by the Sandman. The voices in the dark. At night, Jamie hears voices whispering to him, a chorus of faint, eerie murmurs. He realizes they're the voices of others who have succumbed to the Sandman, their hollow tones blending into a lullaby of despair. Jamie feels the pull, a temptation to let go, to join them, and escape the constant torment. Scene 5. Confronting the darkness within a final plan. Desperate, Jamie decides he must confront the Sandman one last time, hoping to either break free or find peace. He sets up a circle of candles and salt, following a ritual he found in his research, hoping it will force the Sandman into a vulnerable state. With trembling hands, he prepares himself for what he fears may be his last chance. Building to the climax. As Jamie recites the words, the room grows colder, and the shadows deepen. He feels a shift in the air, a darkness gathering around him, and he realizes he has successfully summoned the Sandman. His heart pounds as he steels himself, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. The Sandman's arrival. The Sandman materializes before him, larger and more terrifying than ever, its eyes hollow and endless, its grin wide and menacing. Jamie feels a wave of dread wash over him as the creature speaks, its voice a chilling echo. You brought this upon yourself, Jamie. Scene 6. The truth revealed. The Sandman's origins. The Sandman begins to reveal the truth, explaining that it is an ancient being, feeding off the fear and despair of those who resist it. Jamie learns that he and his family were marked generations ago, chosen as a source of endless sustenance for the creature. Exploring themes of fate and doom. The Sandman explains that every attempt to resist, every act of defiance, only strengthens its hold. Jamie's fear and desperation are precisely what the Sandman needs to thrive, and the more he struggles, the deeper the creature's roots grow within him. A chilling revelation. Jamie realizes that he has been part of the Sandman's plan all along, that his own life, his identity, and his very soul have been carefully shaped by the creature to produce the ultimate source of fear. The realization crushes him, leaving him with a profound sense of helplessness. Scene 7. The Last Stand. An act of desperation. In a final act of defiance, Jamie tries to banish the Sandman by focusing on his memories, his loved ones, and the moments that define him. He channels all his remaining strength into a scream of resistance, hoping to break the Sandman's hold once and for all. Intense psychological horror. Shadows whirl around him, the Sandman's face looming closer as it laughs, absorbing Jamie's fear. Jamie feels himself slipping, pieces of his identity fracturing as he fights to hold on to his own thoughts, his own memories, refusing to surrender. The Sandman's mocking laughter. The Sandman lets out a chilling laugh, telling Jamie that his resistance is futile, that he has already won. Jamie feels his strength fading, his willpower drained as the creature's voice fills his mind, drowning out his own thoughts. Scene 8. A shattered soul, losing himself. Jamie's mind begins to fragment, his memories slipping away as the Sandman consumes him piece by piece. He feels himself dissolving, his sense of self fading into darkness, replaced by an overwhelming emptiness. The Sandman's voice becomes his own, whispering in a tone that chills him to the core. You are me, Jamie. Exploring themes of identity and oblivion. Jamie realizes he has become one with the Sandman, that he is no longer a separate entity, but a part of the creature's endless hunger. His memories, his identity, his very soul have been swallowed by the darkness, leaving only a faint echo of the person he once was, a final flicker of defiance. In the last moments before his identity fades entirely, Jamie holds on to a single memory, a fleeting image of his family, a reminder of who he once was. With his last remaining strength, he resists, clinging to the memory as a final act of defiance against the Sandman's control. Scene 9. The hollow victory. A chilling awakening. Jamie wakes up in his room, his body cold and his mind feeling hollow and distant. He stands up, feeling the weight of the Sandman's presence lingering within him, as if a shadow has taken root in his soul. He knows he is no longer fully himself, that the Sandman has left an indelible mark on him. Ambiguity and lingering horror. Jamie looks into the mirror, seeing his own face but sensing the Sandman's presence lurking behind his eyes. He realizes that he will never be free, that the creature has become a permanent part of him, a darkness that will haunt him for the rest of his life. A final whisper. As he stares at his reflection, he hears a whisper in his mind, the Sandman's voice blending with his own. We are one now, Jamie. The chapter ends with Jamie standing in the dark, a hollow figure caught between himself and the creature that has consumed him. Chapter summary. In Chapter 8, Jamie's final attempt to confront the Sandman leads to a devastating realization. He has been part of the creature's plan all along, shaped to feed its insatiable hunger. Despite his desperate resistance, Jamie ultimately loses a piece of himself, becoming partially absorbed by the Sandman. The chapter ends on a haunting note, with Jamie realizing he may never fully escape the creature's influence. This chapter combines psychological horror and suspense, leaving Jamie trapped in a hollow, inescapable nightmare that blurs the boundaries between himself and the Sandman. Chapter 9. The Descent into Darkness. In Chapter 9, Jamie attempts to reclaim his mind and body from the Sandman's overpowering influence, delving deeper into the twisted realm of nightmares where the Sandman resides. His increasingly tenuous grip on reality and self-control is further weakened as he ventures through eerie landscapes and confronts distorted versions of himself, each one representing a piece of his soul that the Sandman has claimed. As Jamie fights to hold on to his identity, he is forced to confront the possibility that he may never truly escape the Sandman, ending the chapter on a chilling note of despair and ambiguity. Scene 1. The Shadows Within. Living with the Sandman. Jamie's life has become a waking nightmare, and he feels a constant shadow over him as the Sandman's influence grows. Each morning, he awakens feeling exhausted, his thoughts muddled and his memories blurred. He feels the Sandman's presence even in his most private moments, as if the creature is whispering in his mind, eroding his thoughts and emotions, building a sense of helplessness. Jamie feels like he's losing himself, his identity slipping further with each passing day. He sees reflections of the Sandman in windows, mirrors, and even in his own shadow. He knows that the creature is tightening its grip, pushing him toward an inevitable end. A dark command. One evening, Jamie feels a strange compulsion to go to a specific place, the attic of his house. It's a space he usually avoids, but the Sandman's voice in his mind leaves him no choice. He follows the command, driven by an urge he cannot resist, finding himself in the attic surrounded by shadows and eerie silence. Scene 2. The attic's haunting message. Discovering the mirror. In the attic, Jamie finds an old, dusty mirror that seems to pulse with a strange energy. When he looks into it, he doesn't see his own reflection, but instead glimpses a version of himself, grinning with a twisted smile and hollow, dark eyes. The reflection speaks to him, echoing his worst fears and urging him to give in to the Sandman, intensifying the psychological horror. Jamie tries to turn away, but his reflection holds him captive, whispering that he is already one with the dark. The reflection's voice is an eerie blend of his own and the Sandman's, a horrifying reminder that he is losing control. Jamie realizes that the Sandman's presence within him is stronger than ever. A desperate warning. The reflection delivers a final chilling message. The only way to be free is to let go. Jamie stumbles back, feeling a pang of despair as he realizes the Sandman's influence has seeped so deeply into him that even his reflection is no longer his own. Scene 3. Desperate for a solution. Searching for answers, determined to fight back, Jamie delves into ancient texts, looking for any form of protection or spell that could sever his connection to the Sandman. He finds references to a powerful ritual meant to unbind the soul, a process that could destroy the Sandman's hold over him, but at the cost of venturing directly into the creature's realm. Rising tension and sacrifice. Jamie realizes that this ritual could cost him his life or leave him trapped in the Sandman's world forever. Despite the risks, he decides to go through with it, feeling that any fate is better than complete submission to the Sandman. Gathering materials. Jamie spends hours gathering the necessary items, candles, symbols of protection, and a vial of salt, all things meant to shield him during the ritual. As he prepares, he feels the Sandman's whispers intensify, mocking his attempt to resist. Scene 4. Entering the Sandman's realm. Beginning the ritual. Late that night, Jamie begins the ritual, reciting incantations and placing the symbols in a circle around him. The air grows heavy and cold, shadows thickening around him as he feels himself slipping away from his reality and into the Sandman's dark world. Building the horror. Jamie's vision blurs, and he feels himself pulled downward, as if falling into a void. His surroundings twist and shift, becoming a surreal landscape filled with shadows, fog, and faint whispers. He realizes he has crossed into the Sandman's realm, a place where reality and nightmare are indistinguishable. A haunting vision. Jamie sees twisted versions of familiar places, his bedroom, his school, his family's home, all distorted and draped in shadow. He feels an overwhelming sense of isolation as he realizes that this realm is the embodiment of his deepest fears, a place crafted by the Sandman to trap him. Scene 5. Confronting his dark self. The Hall of Mirrors. As he wanders through the Sandman's world, Jamie finds himself in a hallway lined with mirrors. Each mirror reflects a different version of himself, each more distorted and monstrous than the last. He sees his face twisted into a grin, his eyes dark and hollow, mirroring the Sandman's features. Psychological horror and desperation. Jamie realizes that each reflection represents a part of him that the Sandman has claimed. He reaches out, touching one of the mirrors, only to feel a jolt as his reflection grins back, whispering, "We are one, Jamie. There's no escaping this." Breaking the mirrors. Desperate, Jamie begins smashing the mirrors, each shatter releasing an eerie wail that echoes through the hallway. But as he breaks each reflection, he feels a piece of himself slipping away, as though his own identity is fracturing with each shard. Scene 6. The Sandman's Lair. The Heart of Darkness. Jamie eventually finds himself in the center of the Sandman's realm, a vast, dark expanse filled with shadows that pulse and writhe. He senses the Sandman's presence looming over him, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Confronting the ultimate fear, Jamie calls out, demanding that the Sandman face him, to which the creature obliges. The Sandman materializes before him, larger and more terrifying than ever, his hollow eyes fixed on Jamie with a hunger that fills him with dread. The Sandman's final offer. The creature offers Jamie one last chance to surrender, promising that if he lets go willingly, his suffering will end. Jamie is tempted, but he knows that surrendering would mean losing himself forever. He steels himself, declaring that he will never submit. Scene 7. A battle of wills fighting for his soul. Jamie and the Sandman engage in a battle of wills, each one pushing against the other with an intensity that shakes the realm around them. Shadows swirl and pulse, and Jamie feels his own identity slipping as he fights to hold on to his memories, his thoughts, his very sense of self. Climactic horror and tension. The Sandman's voice fills his mind, mocking him, breaking down his resolve with every whispered doubt and fear. Jamie feels his strength fading, his willpower crumbling as the Sandman presses in, consuming him from within. A flicker of hope. Just when Jamie is about to give in, he remembers his family, the people who have been affected by the Sandman for generations. He realizes that by standing his ground, he might break the curse for future generations. This realization gives him a renewed sense of strength, fueling his final act of resistance. Scene 8. Breaking the connection. A final act of defiance. With a surge of determination, Jamie pushes back against the Sandman's influence, focusing on the love he feels for his family, the memories that define him. He shouts, declaring that he is not just a victim, that he refuses to let the Sandman consume him. The power of identity. Jamie's resistance weakens the Sandman's hold, and the creature begins to falter. Shadows peel away from Jamie's body, and he feels a strange lightness as his soul reasserts itself. He realizes that by rejecting his fear, he is weakening the creature's power, the Sandman's defeat. With one final scream, Jamie breaks free of the Sandman's grasp. The creature lets out a furious roar, dissolving into a mass of shadows that swirl and vanish, leaving Jamie alone in the dark, panting and trembling, but alive. Scene 9. A bitter awakening. Returning to reality, Jamie wakes up in his room, feeling hollow and drained, but free from the Sandman's presence. The room feels lighter, as though the shadows have lifted, and he allows himself a moment of relief, believing he has finally won. Lingering ambiguity. As he stands in front of the mirror, he sees his own reflection staring back at him, normal but with a faint glimmer of darkness in his eyes. Jamie realizes that while he has won, a part of the Sandman may remain within him, a permanent scar from his battle, a haunting whisper. Just as he begins to walk away, he hears a faint whisper, the Sandman's voice echoing in the back of his mind. "This isn't over, Jamie." The chapter ends with Jamie standing alone, his victory bittersweet, knowing that while he has escaped, the Sandman may still linger within him. The chapter summary. In Chapter 9, Jamie confronts the Sandman in a final showdown, delving into the creature's realm and facing the darkest parts of himself. Though he manages to break free from the Sandman's grip, the victory comes at a cost, leaving Jamie with the haunting realization that the creature may have left an indelible mark on his soul. This chapter combines intense psychological horror and suspense, ending on a chilling note that suggests Jamie's battle with the Sandman is far from over. Here's an outline for Chapter 10, bringing Jamie's journey to a terrifying, ambiguous conclusion. In this final chapter, Jamie returns to his life with a fragile hope that he has defeated the Sandman. But subtle signs suggest the creature's influence may still linger. As Jamie's paranoia grows, he comes to realize that his identity and fate may be inseparably entwined with the Sandman's. This chapter combines psychological suspense, horror, and an exploration of Jamie's struggle with reality, ending with an unsettling revelation that leaves his ultimate fate uncertain. Chapter 10. The Shadow Within. In Chapter 10, Jamie tries to resume his life, clinging to the belief that his battle with the Sandman is over, but his sense of peace is fleeting as he begins to notice subtle, haunting reminders of the creature. Shadows appear to move. He hears faint whispers at night, and he occasionally catches his reflection grinning back at him. Unable to tell if it's his mind or the Sandman still lurking, Jamie spirals into paranoia, realizing he may never fully escape the creature's influence. This final chapter leaves Jamie's fate ambiguously open, with the suggestion that he may always carry a part of the Sandman within him. Scene 1. A Fragile Hope. The Illusion of Peace. Jamie awakens, feeling an unfamiliar sense of calm. The air in his room feels lighter, and for the first time in months, he thinks he might be free of the Sandman. He smiles to himself, savoring the sensation, hopeful that the worst is behind him. His family notices the change and expresses relief, cautiously optimistic that Jamie has overcome his nightmares. Building suspense. Though he feels relief, Jamie can't shake a lingering unease. Each creak of the house, each shadow cast by the evening light, seems to hide something. He tries to brush it off as paranoia, believing that the Sandman has finally been vanquished. Yet his mind remains on high alert. A moment of reflection. Jamie stands before the mirror, studying his own face for any sign of the creature's influence. His reflection appears normal, yet he feels a strange disconnect, as though the person staring back isn't quite himself. He chalks it up to exhaustion, but can't shake a faint sense of dread. Scene 2. Subtle signs of darkness. The shadows return. Days pass, and Jamie begins noticing unsettling details. Shadows seem to stretch toward him, their forms dark and almost sentient. He'll catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of his eye, but when he turns, there's nothing there. He tries to ignore these signs, convincing himself they're remnants of his trauma. Rising paranoia. Jamie grows increasingly jumpy, his mind filling with doubts. He questions whether he's truly free, or if he's imagining things. Each night, he feels a subtle shift in the air, a cold presence lurking in the corners of his room. He starts sleeping with a light on, but even that fails to banish his fear. A familiar whisper. One night, just as he's about to fall asleep, Jamie hears a faint whisper. It's a voice he recognizes instantly, the Sandman's. His heart pounds as the voice seems to echo in his mind, reminding him that freedom is an illusion. Jamie tells himself it's his imagination, but the experience shakes him deeply. Scene 3. Visions and doubts, unsettling hallucinations. As Jamie tries to go about his daily life, he begins seeing the Sandman's twisted grin in reflections and windows. In moments of distraction, his own reflection will flash into the Sandman's dark eyes and wicked smile, only to return to normal when he blinks. These visions fill Jamie with dread, making him question whether the Sandman truly left, or if he's simply waiting. Psychological horror and isolation. Jamie feels increasingly isolated, unable to trust his own mind. His family grows concerned as he becomes withdrawn and nervous, but he fears telling them the truth. He worries that if he speaks of the Sandman, he'll somehow give the creature power, inviting him back into his life. A dark reminder. Jamie returns home one day to find the word mine scrawled faintly in the dust on his mirror. He stares at it, horrified, realizing that the Sandman may still hold a claim on him. He tries wiping it away, but the word seems etched into the glass, a chilling reminder that his victory may have been only temporary. Scene 4. Slipping between worlds, fading boundaries. Jamie's grip on reality weakens as he begins slipping between the real world and a nightmarish version of it. Shadows move on their own, and familiar places distort in strange, unsettling ways. He'll find himself standing in dark, surreal versions of his home, only to blink and return to normal, unsure if he's awake or dreaming. Blurring reality and nightmare. Jamie feels as though he's walking a thin line between two worlds, the Sandman's realm constantly seeping into his own. He can no longer tell when he's truly awake, haunted by the feeling that he's being pulled back into the Sandman's grasp, a sense of dread. Each time he experiences one of these shifts, Jamie senses the Sandman's presence, closer and stronger. The air grows cold, and he hears the faint echo of the creature's laughter, a low, mocking sound that fills him with terror. He realizes that the Sandman may still be lurking, waiting for the right moment to reclaim him. Scene 5. Confronting his own reflection. The mirror's truth. One night, Jamie finds himself drawn to the mirror, compelled to confront his reflection. He stares into his own eyes, searching for any trace of the Sandman. To his horror, his reflection begins moving independently, a slow, sinister grin spreading across its face, heightening the horror. Jamie's reflection whispers to him, its voice an eerie echo of his own. "You can't escape me, Jamie," it says, the words filled with a chilling certainty. Jamie feels his own face twist into the grin, as if the Sandman is controlling him from within, and he fights to break free, a horrifying realization. Jamie steps back, his heart racing, realizing that the Sandman may not be a separate entity anymore. He feels a crushing sense of dread as he considers that the Sandman may have become part of him, an inseparable shadow that will forever haunt him. Scene 6. The last attempt. Desperate for freedom, Jamie decides to make one final attempt to banish the Sandman. He lights candles, surrounds himself with protective symbols, and recites words he remembers from his research. He closes his eyes, focusing all his energy on forcing the Sandman out of his mind, out of his soul, building tension. As he performs the ritual, Jamie feels a strange pull, as if he's being torn between two realities. Shadows swirl around him, and he senses the Sandman's presence, resisting his efforts, clinging to him with a fierce, dark energy. A final struggle. Jamie shouts, demanding that the Sandman leave him, pushing back with every ounce of strength he has. The shadows twist and writhe, and he feels the creature's influence weaken, flickering like a candle about to go out. For a moment, he believes he's won, that he's free at last. Scene 7. The Sandman's return, a haunting victory. As Jamie opens his eyes, he feels an unsettling calm. The room is silent, and the air feels lighter. He sighs in relief, convinced that he has finally defeated the Sandman. But as he looks in the mirror, he sees something that chills him to his core, his own reflection, grinning with a wide, hollow-eyed smile. The final revelation. Jamie's reflection speaks, its voice a blend of his own and the Sandman's. "We are one, Jamie," it says, and he realizes that his final struggle only served to bind them closer. He feels the Sandman's presence within him, woven into his very being, an inescapable part of who he has become. Accepting the darkness, Jamie stands before the mirror, understanding that he will never be free. The Sandman has merged with him, claiming his soul and identity. Jamie feels a strange, eerie calm, accepting that the creature is now a part of him, an ever-present shadow that will accompany him for the rest of his life. Scene 8. Living with the shadow. The new normal. Days pass, and Jamie learns to live with the Sandman's presence within him. He feels the creature's influence in small, unsettling ways, fleeting thoughts that aren't his own, moments of cold, and shadows that seem to follow him wherever he goes. He knows that the Sandman is watching, waiting, but he forces himself to carry on. Exploring themes of identity and duality, Jamie realizes that he is no longer fully himself, that the Sandman has fused with him. He begins to wonder if he can control it, live with it, and perhaps keep the darkness at bay. But he knows that every moment is a test, a battle for control over his own mind. A chilling whisper. One night, as Jamie lies in bed, he hears a final whisper, a quiet reminder of his new reality. "Good night, Jamie," the Sandman's voice says softly. Jamie closes his eyes, feeling the creature's presence like a shadow in the back of his mind, knowing that he is never truly alone. Scene 9. The ambiguous ending. A haunting reflection. Jamie stares into his reflection one last time, seeing his own face but sensing the Sandman's presence within him. He feels a strange, unsettling acceptance, understanding that he will never be free, that the creature has become a part of him. Lingering ambiguity. The chapter ends with Jamie walking away from the mirror, his expression a mix of resignation and determination. Though he carries the Sandman's shadow within him, he resolves to live, to hold on to whatever part of himself remains, even if it means forever sharing his mind with the darkness. Final line. The last line hints at Jamie's eternal struggle, leaving readers with an eerie sense of unease. As he closed his eyes that night, he knew the Sandman would always be there, in his thoughts, in his dreams, a shadow that would never fade. Chapter. Summary. In Chapter 10, Jamie's attempt to live a normal life is shattered as he realizes the Sandman is now a permanent part of him. His identity is forever bound to the creature, leaving him haunted by its presence in every moment. The chapter explores Jamie's resignation and acceptance of the darkness within him, ending with an ambiguous but chilling note that suggests he may never be free. This final chapter combines horror and psychological suspense, closing Jamie's story with an eerie sense of inevitability, as he learns to live with the shadow that will forever haunt him.